This video is sponsored by Squarespace. We've got a slightly new setting here. The gingham couch is gone, and I'm sorry to say to those of you who really liked it, it's gone forever. We've talked before on this channel about Los Angeles' weird history and wacky things that the Victorians thought was entertainment. From deadly staged train collisions to restaurants shaped like the food they were selling, the turn of the century and slightly onwards was a very weird period of time for tourism and thrill-seeking. And one topic in this vein that has haunted me for years is the odd prevalence in old Los Angeles of exotic animal farms. In the late Victorian era until literally the 50s, and sometimes the 80s, exotic animal farms in LA were huge business, not just because of the things they were selling, but also the experiences. LA had a storied history of being a city of theatrical and odd amusements long before Disneyland, you know. Of course, exotic animal attractions in the US at large have never gone away. Anyone who lives in Florida could tell you that. And just last year, we were all spending the beginning of the pandemic watching the noxious meltdown that was Tiger King on Netflix. So, truthfully, America today isn't really all that different from our ancestors of 100 years ago, except for the fact that back then, these farms were far more socially acceptable and a lot more widely dangerous. Ever thought about putting your baby in a gator enclosure? Come learn about it with me. But before we get into it, let's hear a word from today's fantastic returning sponsor, Squarespace. If you watched my last video, you know that I've been working on building a new portfolio site to showcase my work, and Squarespace has been such an incredible platform for doing that. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business or showcase your work, and they have all the tools you need to build a super nice looking site in less than a few hours depending on your needs. If you have a small business selling things online, they have loads of extremely helpful built-in e-commerce tools to help your business stay organized and running smoothly, and their system automatically configures your site for mobile, which is absolutely not optional these days. I've been putting my site's various pages together to show off the various projects that I've completed, and they seriously look so much nicer now on a website that's actually built to make my work look its best. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/CazRow to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using my code CazRow. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to learning about LA's messed up animal attractions. So if you watched my video on LA's lost novelty architecture, which was my first video on this channel, you've heard me talk before about how LA's Wild West beginnings led to a sort of accepted chaos that allowed it to develop an almost circus-like culture in many aspects around the turn of the century. It was a city that boomed under tourism and selling the mythos of itself as a unique place of fantasy that must be seen to be believed. With the rise of Hollywood and car culture later on, LA was unlike any other city in the US, much less the world. It was a place where, in many ways, the real world, one of structure and traditionalism, simply didn't exist. You could drive around and see massive film sets on the side of the road, the structures of Babylon, for instance. You could go have dinner in a restaurant that looks like a prison, eating in a cell and being served by prisoners. Seriously. This building is now home today to the restaurant El Cid, by the way. Long before Disney or Universal Studios or the chaos of Hollywood's Sunset Boulevard, a different sort of attraction had a grip on the city: exotic animal farms that drew visitors from all over the world and many celebrities too. These tourist attractions were made extremely accessible by the Pacific Electric streetcar system that sprawled over LA's landscape. I know it's hard to imagine LA with an extensive public transportation system that actually works well, but yeah, we used to have one before the car companies took over. The electric railway was so successful at the turn of the century, in fact, that it rivaled most other US cities. As one magazine from the era said, "Any city in the country might well be proud of so perfect an electric transit system as that of the new Pasadena and Los Angeles Electric Railway, and it is doubtful if any other city can yet match it. Certainly New York has no surface road remotely to be compared with this. It is to the unusual electric line what a Pullman service is to an old-fashioned car. With its important termini, a delightful itinerary, and magnificent equipment, the P&LA, though already a huge success, has every promise of growing to much greater things. Could have had a functioning train system, but instead, we have this. These railways were vital for visitors to be able to access the various tourist attractions LA had to offer, such as Mount Lowe, Griffith Park, the beaches, etc. But one attraction in particular became so notoriously famous and popular, it had an entire line named after it, the Ostrich Farm Railway, which, of course, led writers to Costin's Ostrich Farm. Now, Costin's Ostrich Farm wasn't the first ostrich farm in LA, but it was definitely the most famous. The first one was actually started by Charles Sketchley in 1883 in Buena Park, near where Disneyland is now. Sketchley, who had worked before with ostriches in South Africa, was seeking to capitalize off of the immense demand for ostrich feathers in women's fashion at the time. Feathers were, of course, used as plumage for millinery, but they also were very popular in boas, collars, and muffs. Later on, a man named Edwin Costin burst onto the ostrich scene. Like Sketchley, Costin had spent time working with ostriches in South Africa, then under British control. When Costin arrived in 1885, Cape Colony was trying very hard to pass a large tax on each ostrich exported, $500 per ostrich and $125 per egg. In today's money, that's about $14,257 per ostrich and $3,564 per egg. The tax wasn't yet passed in the Natal province, though. As Costin later wrote, in order to avoid this heavy tax, which would have greatly handicapped the new industry in California, we proceeded by steamer to Natal on the east coast, much further north. We reached Durban, the chief port, and from there made many runs to the interior, visiting different parts of the colony in search of birds. We found few ostriches were raised there, and that they were held in slight esteem by the natives until it became known that someone was desirous of purchasing, and then there was a rapid boom in the market. Costin left the country with 52 ostriches, and arrived in Galveston, Texas after 2 months at sea, because the Panama Canal wasn't yet built, so they couldn't go directly to LA. 8 of the ostriches had died at sea, and one of them, named Murphy, had died because he broke out of his cage and got into the food stores, eating so many potatoes that he actually died. Rest in peace, soldier. And so, with about 42 to 44 ostriches left, Costin and his crew of birds boarded a train to LA. Costin's first business venture with the ostriches was a short-lived failure at the Washington Gardens. As the writer E.H. Rydell wrote, he got to Los Angeles and opened a menagerie of his ostriches and a lot of wildcats, mountain lions, skunks, opossums, and other carnivora. His father kept sending him money, for he thought he needed it, and he did. The tourists who visit California did not go in crowds to see his show. They would not buy his ostrich feathers, and sad to relate, his ostriches began to die. So he was wise. He closed the menagerie, sold his smelling carnivora to the highest bidder for cash. But his next attempt at ostrich fame would be a huge success. Costin's Ostrich Farm in South Pasadena, which is a different city from actual Pasadena. The ostriches quickly became a sensation. Most people had never seen an ostrich before at all. Costin wrote, "Some ludicrous things happened, at least we thought them funny. One man to this day is minus his straw hat, which was promptly whipped off his head and devoured as a dainty morsel by a couple of those gigantic birds." Okay, let's start keeping a list of all the weird shit these animals are eating. Too many potatoes. Straw hat. It was at this point in my research that I started hoping that the ostriches would organize to rise up and take control of the farm and maybe escape their enclosures and terrorize the city. But that doesn't happen, sorry. The farm was described as picturesque, with an expansive garden, as well as a Japanese tea room, as well as a store. Costin collaborated with the Pacific Electric Railway to have special stopover tickets made so that visitors riding the streetcars could get off and spend some time at the farm before continuing on the line. The farm itself was absolutely pivotal to the rise and development of South Pasadena, with the Herald claiming, "The big ostrich farm of Edwin Costin is the best known feature of South Pasadena and has done more to advertise the place than any one form or attraction." The ostriches themselves became sort of local celebrities, and the papers printed goofy stories about them, even encouraging ostrich shipping with ostrich wedding ceremonies. The ostriches were even named, usually after historical figures like Beau Brummel, Grover Cleveland, Cleopatra, and George Washington. During your visit, you could stop by one of Costin's lavish showrooms to purchase ostrich feather garments and accessories, or just feathers, as well as ostrich-themed souvenirs. And obviously, there were ostrich enclosures where you could get up close and personal with the ostriches and take photos, as well as ride in a wagon or carriage pulled by ostriches. Personally, I have no clue how people got so close to the ostriches because, frankly, they are so scary. Back in June, as part of research for this video, I stopped by Ostrichland USA, the last ostrich farm left in Southern California, and holy shit, ostriches are terrifying. Like, they're really cool, but I definitely didn't want to get too close to them.
Alright, you! Give me back my phone and nobody gets hurt! You said nobody gets hurt! Those were your exact words!
If you've ever seen these Costin's postcards before, though, you may have noticed a few showing people actually riding on the ostrich's back. Shockingly enough, while you apparently could ride on the ostrich, most of these tourist photos of people on the ostrich's back are, staged, because the ostrich itself is actually a taxidermied photographic prop. I mean, I guess it makes sense since these ostriches are dangerous and certainly wouldn't stand that still for a photo, but it's still disturbing. Costin was extremely sensitive to his business reputation, and especially with the rise of animal rights groups, and made a very big point in emphasizing how his birds are well taken care of. He said that the feathers were never plucked, only clipped, and birds were never killed, which definitely could not be said of the other species of bird in the exotic feather trade at the time. Costin pled to his audience of lady consumers, "I am sure if ladies stopped to think a moment, they would do more than they are doing now to discourage the indiscriminate and cruel slaughter of hundreds of thousands of brightly plumaged birds at all seasons of the year, irrespective of nesting time or anything else. Undoubtedly, the ostrich was made to furnish feathers just as the sheep furnishes wool. And putting personal pecuniary interests aside, I think all ladies should encourage and support by practical means the efforts of those kind-hearted ladies who are doing all in their power to discourage the senseless fashion that entails so much wanton waste and cruel destruction of bright bird life." He also fought off the bad rumors of the ostriches' diets, explaining that they were well fed on good food, including lots of oranges which were thrown to the birds during feeding time so that visitors could watch. The ostriches tended to swallow things whole, so as many as 10 oranges would cartoonishly slide down their gullets in a row. But as they are extremely curious and voracious, they could also snatch and eat whatever you have too close to them. Quote Costin again, "I have seen one swallow a lighted cigar, a gimlet, a lady's purse, a society paper rolled up for mailing, and an old shoe." Alright. Add cigar, gimlet, purse, society paper, and shoe to the list. Eventually, Costin returned to England and sold the farm to a syndicate of bankers, after which the farm rapidly lost its spark. It survived until the mid-30s when ostrich feathers and luxurious excess were no longer appealing to most people and closed its doors. No clue what happened to the ostriches. Maybe they were sold to the Los Angeles Ostrich Farm, or maybe to the LA Zoo. Los Angeles Ostrich Farm, operated in Luna Park by rumored mining scammer Francis Ernest, operated until 1953. And Ernest himself wasn't just in the ostrich farm business. He dealt with gators, too. This one is even more bewildering to me. And it was open in some capacity until 1984. In 1907, Francis Ernest and Joe Alligator Campbell opened the Los Angeles Alligator Farm in Lincoln Heights with about 1,000 gators. And for the mere cost of 25 cents, you could enter the gator zoo and sit in a pool of the beasts, watching them slide down massive 16-foot slides, witness them bloodily feast on chickens, and obviously put your baby in the enclosure to play with them, or have them drive your child around in a carriage. Makes sense. Not only that, but a common attraction was watching people wrestle the gators, and if you wanted to, you could even buy a small gator, which only further encouraged the gator theft by local college frat boys. The most famous gator at the farm was an old guy named Billy who appeared in a lot of films because he was fairly docile and would open his mouth wide when you showed him a piece of meat. They also had a massive gator named Okeechobee who they claimed was 500 years old, which was an obvious lie because gators only live to be around 30 to 50 years old usually, but hey, in a business where you're letting babies play with 13-foot-long deadly reptiles, anything goes, I guess. And the enclosures weren't even, well, enclosed well. Frequently, the gators would escape the fencing, making their way through the surrounding neighborhoods, striking terror into local residents with the gators appearing in people's pools and yards. Despite all this, no one was ever harmed or killed at Los Angeles Alligator Farm, with the only exception being Francis Ernest Jr., the son of the owner, Francis Ernest Sr. As an 8-year-old in 1925, Francis Jr. was playing with one of the gators when it bit his hand. Francis Ernest Sr. jumped on top of the gator, wrestled it down, and gouged its eyes out. His son was taken to the hospital, but he was almost totally fine and only suffered from one scar on his hand for the rest of his life. But holy shit, dude. As the LA Times writes, for almost half a century, more than 1,000 belligerently restless gators annoyed their human neighbors with their frequent nocturnal bellowing, reportedly in B-flat. People barely put up with the gator menaces until the 50s when they were forced to move to Buena Park. Now you may be wondering, ostriches, gators, what other exotic animals did people think it was okay to get close to and mess around with for fun? Well, the answer actually takes us back, in a way, to the realm of Hollywood. The last farm we'll visit today is called Gay's Lion Farm, which is objectively funny. Opened in 1925 in El Monte by Charles Gay, who was a French circus performer, the farm was originally established so that they could rent out the lions to the film studios. This was the home to Jackie and Leo, the two roaring MGM opening card lions, and Numa, who appeared in various films such as Charlie Chaplin's The Circus. But as anyone with a brain could guess, this operation was bound for tragedy from the get-go. In one incident, a trainer named Herman Ziegler stumbled during a show and was attacked and killed by a lion. In 1928, a trainer at the farm named John Roonan was fatally injured when 3 lions escaped and attacked him. One of the lions was named the N-word. Literally the actual N-word. Well, 2 of the lions were shot, one of them being the one with the racial slur name, and right after they were shot, a photo was taken of Lion Farm guide Joe Hoffman standing beside one of the dead lions, gun in hand. Gay's Lion Farm, thankfully, did not survive past World War II. Gay's Lion Farm is a really good example of how these exotic animal farms were pretty clearly racialized. I can already hear some of you going down to the comments to yell at me for making this about race or whatever, but frankly, I don't care. One of the damn lions was literally named the N-word. We need to have this conversation. The fact that Gay's Lion Farm took up residence in the then dominantly white city of El Monte was extremely glaring when you look closer and see the way that this farm capitalized off of the image of the civilized West triumphing over the wild and primitive other. A great deal of LA's exotic animal attractions were situated in locations outside of the urban centers, not just because that's where the animals should be, but also because it was areas where, especially after the automobile boom, white residents were fleeing to, trying to escape a rapidly diversifying urban community. These farms were often set up in an almost theatrical way to emphasize the exoticism of their animals and the places where they came from, with the exception of Costin's Ostrich Farm, which tried its best to be more like a garden that just happened to have ostriches in there, further reinforcing stereotypes about Africa and alienating Black visitors. It's also impossible to ignore the fact that these animals were largely imported from Africa, actively utilizing European and American capitalism to remove valuable goods and assets from the countries where they came from. When white businessmen exported hundreds, thousands of ostriches out of Africa to build their ostrich feather and tourism empires, it continued the long-standing tradition of denying Africans access to their own assets and means of income, and reinforcing the idea that Europeans can take whatever they want from non-white countries. Whether or not you agree with people using these animals for capital gain or eating them or selling their feathers, the fact is, this is still how the pieces fell and how it impacted people in African trades and communities. It also impacted the way that many South African societies relied on ostrich eggs as a food source, something which frankly wasn't lost even on American consumers who were quickly becoming conscious of the dark sides of the bird feather trades. As Aomar Boum writes in the elegant Plume, Ostrich Feathers, North African Commercial Networks and European Capitalism, the Audubon Society built close contacts with other anti-plume organizations organizations in Europe, especially in the London-based Society for the Protection of Birds. However, although restrictions on the ostrich plume were relative, women were asked to boycott any wild African ostrich feathers. The plume guilt was not only based on a critique of European consumer behavior and its lack of consciousness about the environment, but also its lack of concern for traditional African societies, which partially based their survival on ostrich meat and eggs. But all of this is extremely par for the course for LA of the late 1800s through, well, World War II. A city built on theatricality and whimsy that often went way too far. A city that many quick-thinking businessmen saw great opportunity in, even if it meant exploitation or endangering the lives of the people involved. A city where you could be kept up at night by alligators roaring in B-flat, or ostriches mating, or lions or monkeys, or any other number of animals that had no business being there. And then, the next day after a sleepless night, you could pay a small fee to go into the creature's enclosure and put your 2-year-old child on its back. And if anyone gets hurt, well, that's just showbiz. What? It's the 1900s and you're in a city that's basically a living vaudeville show. Did you expect anything different? Thank you for learning with me about the weird exotic animal farms of Los Angeles' past. This was a literally wild one that I've been wanting to talk about for a while now. The next time I see you will be in December, so happy early Hanukkah to my lovely Jewish viewers who are celebrating. Yes, Hanukkah starts on November 28th this year. I hope you have a great holiday. So wash thy hands, wear thy mask, and pour one out for our friend Murphy the ostrich, who ate too many potatoes.